everyone, and welcome to BookTrib, NetGalley, and Merrill Mass Media present 15 Minutes with. Today we welcome consultant, writer, and speaker, Michele Phoenix. She's the author of The Space Between Words, which is releasing in September. Michele has taught for 20 years at Black Forest Academy in Germany before launching her own ministry advocating for third culture kids, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Welcome, Michele. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, let's first chat about the space between words. Can you talk a little bit about your characters and the story that's happening within the novel?
Yeah, it's a story that happens in two different timelines. It really begins at the attacks in Paris, the terrorist attacks at the concert hall in Paris, and an American happens to be there and is part of what happens there, and it follows her survival of that event and trying to make sense of the horrible that happens in life and how to survive that, and I really wanted to have that two timeline story going on, and I tried to look into the past, into the history of France, and find something that would be meaningful in addressing today's terror. And I came upon the Huguenot story, the Protestants of France who were decimated by several different kings in the 1600s, 1700s, around that timeline. And from there, I kind of built this treasure hunt that this young lady, Jessica, goes on with the B&B owners that she ends up becoming friends with, trying to figure out how the past can illuminate the present and help her to find.
Oh, it's such an interesting, intricate story that you've kind of woven. What for you was the inspiration to really start this story? Is it something you've wanted to write for a while? Did it just come to you one day?
Well, the initial impetus was that Thomas Nelson wanted another book, so it's to start.
Of course.
I actually tried another book, and I had about 140 pages written of a totally different story, and I realized that this was not a story I wanted to tell. But at the time, I was in my aunt's apartment in Paris writing, so I was kind of steeping in the French culture, and I happened to be listening to Craig Ferguson. He's a late-night talk show host on an interview that he was giving. I love him. And he said very casually in the middle of this interview, if you want to understand the present, you've got to explore the past. And since I was in France, I started to look for two parallel lines to follow, and this is what I came up with. So I owe this story to Craig Ferguson.
Well, maybe one day he'll be watching this and he'll see you say that.
And he does love history, so I hope he reads the book someday too. Yeah. But the historical piece is really a small part of the story. Really, the main part of the story is Jessica and the two B&B owners, Grant and Mona, and their son, Connor, taking off, really following this Huguenot family from the small clues they find in an old flea market all the way across France into England, trying to reunite, post-mortem, to reunite this family that was decimated by the French monarchy.
Interesting. Now, were there ever times for you physically writing the book, in particular, that was maybe different from your past experiences writing novels, or did anything surprise you during this writing process, maybe in your research or in your outlines?
It was a totally different experience for me because it was a book that wasn't already trotting around in my head. It was something that I had to develop. And that was a challenging thing for me because I usually write a book like I watch a movie. It just kind of comes pouring out naturally. I think the other piece that was unique to this book is that it ended up being a travelogue of these places that I went. As the story was developing, I was able to go to the places that were represented in the story. I got into the Huguenot chapel in Canterbury Cathedral in England because I have a friend who's a member of the clergy, so he was able to get us into this tiny, beautiful, historic chapel. And we found this old silk mill in a tiny village called Holford in Somerset, England. And of course, the Protestants of those days were involved in the silk trade. So the remains of this silk mill is actually where the story ends as they start to find the remaining clues that they're looking for. So it was a very organic and mysterious process, I think, this time, more so than usual.
Interesting. What about since your first book, going back to that, do you feel that your writing has changed at all? Do you think that, it's grown, or you kind of find that you still go back to those first novels and remember what you've learned?
It's changed because the first books I wrote with the intention of self-publishing. So
interesting. Okay.
is lower, the expectation is lower. I knew the audience that I was going to self-publish to. So I think that since joining first Tyndale and now Thomas Nelson, that I just have this perspective that there are going to be more people who are not necessarily like me who are going to be reading the book. So I try to write to a broader understanding, a broader audience.
Interesting. And as you mentioned, travel really does play a role in this book. And quite honestly, your travel plays a vital role in all of your books, from what I'm seeing. Is that something that you want to keep up as you continue writing? Is that kind of another character in your book, is the travel?
It's a huge part of me because I was actually born and raised in France and then worked in Germany for 20 years. So this global concept of life, I think, is important to me. And I call my novels destination novels because I like to take people to different places with each of the books I write.
Sure, definitely. Now, born and raised in France, but you have no accent, or at least to the American ear.
Right.
How did you, are you multilingual? How, do you speak any French or?
My father was Canadian. My mom is American. They were missionaries in France, but worked for a lot of years, worked in an English-speaking environment. So I was actually completely bilingual in French and English. So I can speak both languages pretty much without an accent, which is a huge asset.
Yeah.
Traveling the world.
Yeah. That's amazing. So can you explain, I'd like to talk about what a third culture kid is, and why these particular children are so close to your heart at this point in the things that you do.
So a third culture kid is anybody who has spent a significant number of their formative years in a culture other than their passport culture. So it would include military kids and diplomats kids, anybody that has grown up in a foreign culture for a certain number of years. And what we don't realize is that growing up across borders and across cultures actually instills in them some very specific traits, most of them really good and helpful in life and beneficial, and some of them that they need to process and work through. So how do you, for instance, leave a global existence and set up a home or a life in a monocultural setting? And how do you deal with what you have to abandon in order to fit into one place? And the concept that you don't fit in anywhere 100%. So just helping them to process a lot of that. A lot of third culture kids come from very mobile worlds. So they've said a lot of goodbyes. They haven't had a lot of long-term relationships, so just walking them through some of that as well can be really useful. They are huge assets to organizations who are looking for third culture kids who can function well in multiple places, but we just need to help them with some of the challenges that also come along with it.
Interesting. Now you also have your own company. Are you still working on Global Outreach Mission?
That's not actually my own company. It's the mission that I work with. And I've been with them for 20 years teaching at the Black Forest Academy in Germany. And then when I decided to move kind of more global with what I do, they decided to keep me on. So I'm still working for this mission, Global Outreach Mission in Buffalo, New York.
Wonderful. Now, I have to ask this because I'm a little bit of a traveler myself. Where in the world haven't you been yet that you want to go?
Australia. Hands down.
And what's funny is I have been there.
Really?
Yeah. Go do it immediately. Yeah. Anywhere else?
You know what? I don't think so. I get to go this year. I'm going to Bethlehem and Dakar, Senegal. And Budapest, I think, is in the winter months too. So I'm getting around enough. I think that if I can just make it to Australia, I'll check that off my list and call it done.
Do it as soon as you can. I highly advise it. So what's next for you, Michele? Are you already working on a new release? What are you writing? And is it in the same vein as your other books?
I have a lot of work going on these days. Of this ministry that I'm involved in. I do want to write another book, but I want to go back to the more organic version of writing. So I am always open to new ideas that pop into my mind. And when they do, I'll sit down and write. My rough drafts usually take me about 2 or 3 weeks to write. So it's a real speedy initial process. Yeah. And that's the way I like to do it. So if something crosses my mind, my second book, I was vacuuming and I saw this little girl's face in my mind. And that was all I needed. I dropped the vacuum, went to bed with my laptop, started to type, and about 21 days later had a rough draft. So I'm looking forward to it. I love that process, but it's not something I can just create out of nothing. So I'm waiting.
Yeah, definitely. Now, do you write as you travel? Is that something that you like to do or can use your time during that process to do?
I can. Really, the best writing I can do when I travel is if I've already got that first draft down. So I can just go at it, an hour or 2 hours at a time on a plane or in a train or whatever. So ideally, I would have the bare bones structure of the story, and then I can do it while I travel.
And where is like home base for you? Are you in the US when you're home, or are you in Canada when you're home? Where are you when you're home?
Actually, I'm talking to you from Canada right now, but this is my mom's house. My home is in Wheaton, Illinois, just outside of Chicago.
Oh, okay, lovely. Well, what about, we like to ask this question to a lot of our authors. What about the other side of things? What are you reading? What do you like to read? Is there any pile of books on your bedstand right now?
Mhm. The book I go back to every time I want inspiration is Pat Conroy's Beach Music. I think that it was a defining book in my life. And I love to go back also to The Secret Life of Bees. For some reason, those two books are my bookends creatively. And anything but Pat Conroy I'll read over and over again, but particularly Beach Music was an impactful book for me.
Interesting, very interesting. Well, I know that one thing that our readers really love is to just get an understanding from the author. Ultimately, what is it that you want the book to? What do you want the reader to get from the book? What is the message that you're trying to send?
And this book is a tough one because, I mean, the scenes that happened during that terrorist attack are pretty awful scenes. And I listened to a lot of French coverage of it and watched firsthand accounts of people who had been in the Bataclan concert hall when it happened. And I think more and more as these events happen around the world, we wonder, where is goodness in all of this? Where is God in all of this? And how do we all survive to some degree this PTSD syndrome that we carry with us from not knowing any place that's safe anymore? So I wanted to investigate how those Christians from hundreds of years ago dealt with the massacres and the horrible torture that they underwent in those days, and how did they keep the faith with a gun to their heads, literally most of the time. And so I wanted this book to accentuate the fact that no matter what life throws at us, for whatever reason, whether it's the cruelty of man to man or living on this groaning planet that's about to give up the ghost, whatever it is that life throws at us, how can we see God layering good over the bad? He just, no matter how bad it is, eventually there's always some good that gets layered over it. He gets the final word.
Absolutely.
And it doesn't make the pain more bearable. It doesn't make death any less permanent. But if we can just hang on until we see some glimmer of light coming out of that, I think we all have a little bit more hope to go through life with.
Definitely. And I think the goodness of humanity comes out of those situations too, as bad as humanity can be.
But that part we need to go looking for, right? The bad stuff thrown at us in the media day in and day out. If we can be intentional about looking for the good, I think life will look a whole lot better.
Certainly. Absolutely. Well, The Space Between Words is out in September. It's up for pre-order. Go grab it. Order it now so that you can have it on your Kindle or in your hands. However you want it, you get it. And I can't thank you enough for talking to us today, Michele.
Thank you. Thanks. It's been my pleasure.
Absolutely. And everyone have a nice day. Thank you.